Hello, and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Between Planets by Robert Heinlein. Our hero Don has just arrived on Venus and discovered his Earth money is no use here. He has been invited to a lunch at a cheap restaurant by an obliging fellow who has volunteered to change money for him. Not that that's legal, mind you. Don didn't say anything. Ling went on. Now, just speaking hypothetically, how much Federation money do you have? About 500 credits. Let's see it. Don hesitated. Ling said sharply, Come on, don't you trust me? After all, it's just so much waste paper. Don got out his money. Ling looked at it and took out his wallet, started counting out bills. Some of those big bills will be hard to move, he commented. Suppose we say 15%. The money he laid down looked exactly like that Don had placed on the table, except that each note had been overprinted with Venus Republic. Don did a rapid calculation. 15% of what he had came to 75 credits, more or less, not even half what he needed to pay for a radiogram to Mars. He picked up his money and started putting it back into his wallet. What's the matter? It's no use to me. I told you I need $187.50 to pay for my radiogram. Well, 20%, and I'm doing you a favor because you're a youngster in trouble. 20% was still only 100 credits. No. Be reasonable. I can't move it at more than a point or two over that. I might take a loss. Commercial money draws 8% now, the way things are booming. This stuff has to go into hiding, losing 8% every year. If the war goes on very long, it's a net loss. What do you expect? Fiscal theory was over Don's head. He simply knew that anything less than the price of a message to Mars did not interest him. He shook his head. Ling shrugged and gathered up his money. It's your loss. Say, that's a handsome ring you're wearing. Thanks. How much money did you say you needed? Don repeated it. You see, I've just got to get word to my family. I don't really need money for anything else. I can work. Mind if I look at that ring? Don did not want to pass it over, but there seemed no way to avoid it without being rude. Ling slipped it on. It was quite loose on his bony finger. Just my size, and it's got my initial, too. Huh? My milk name, Henry. I'll tell you, Don, I'd really like to help you out. Suppose we say 20% on your money, and I'll take the ring for the balance of what you need to send your gram, okay? Don could not have told why he refused, but he was beginning to dislike Ling, beginning to regret being obligated to him for a meal. The sudden switch aroused his stubborn streak. It's a family keepsake, he answered, not for sale. Hey, you're in no position to be sentimental. The ring is worth more here than it is on Earth, but I'm still offering you much more than it's worth. Don't be a fool. I know you are, Don answered, and I don't understand why you are. In any case, the ring is not for sale. Give it back to me. And suppose I don't? Don took a deep breath. Well then, he said slowly, I suppose I'll have to fight you for it. Ling looked at him for a moment, then took off the ring and dropped it on the table. He then walked out of the booth without saying anything more. Don stared after him and tried to figure it out. He was still wondering when the curtain was pushed aside and the restaurant keeper came in. He dropped a chit on the table. 1 and 6, he said stolidly. Did Mr. Ling pay for it? He invited me to have dinner with him. 1 and 6, Charlie repeated. You ate, you pay. Don stood up. Where do you wash dishes around here? I might as well get started. Chapter 9. Bone Money. Before the evening was over, the job of washing dishes for his dinner developed into a fixed arrangement. The salary was small. Don calculated it would take him roughly forever to save enough money to send a radiogram to his parents, but it included 3 meals a day of Charlie's superlative cooking. Charlie himself seemed a very decent sort under his gruffness. He expressed a complicated and most disparaging opinion of Johnny Ling, using the same highly spiced lingua franca he had used on the move-overs. He also denied any relationship to Ling, while attributing to Ling other relationships which were, on the face of them, improbable. After the last customer was gone and the last dish dried, Charlie made up a pallet for Don on the floor of the back room in which Don had dined. As Don undressed and crawled into bed, he remembered that he should have phoned the spaceport security office and told them his address. Tomorrow would do, he thought sleepily. Anyhow, the restaurant had no phone. He woke up in darkness with a feeling of oppression. For a terrified moment, he thought someone was holding him down and trying to rob him. As he came wider awake, he realized where he was and what was causing the oppressed feeling. Move-overs. There were 2 of them in bed with him. One was snuggled up to his back and was holding onto his shoulders. The other was cradled in his lap, spoon fashion. Both were snoring gently. Someone had undoubtedly left a door open for a moment, and they had sneaked in. Don chuckled to himself. It was impossible to be angry with the affectionate little creatures. He snatched the one in front of him between its horns. He scratched the one in front of him between its horns and said, "Look, kids, this is my bed. Now get out of here before I get tough." They both bleated and snuggled closer. Don got up, got each of them by an ear, and evicted them through the curtain. "Now stay out." They were back in bed before he was. Don thought about it and gave up. The back room had no door that could be closed. As for chucking them outside the building, the place was dark and still strange to him, and he was not sure of the location of light switches. Nor did he want to wake Charlie. After all, there was no harm in bedding down with a move-over. They were cleanly little things, no worse than having a dog curl up against one. Better, for dogs harbor fleas. "Move over," he ordered, unintentionally renaming them, "and give me some room." He did not go at once to sleep. The dream had awakened him, still troubled him. He sat up, fumbled in the dark, and found his money, which he tucked under him. He then remembered the ring, and feeling somewhat foolish, he pulled on a sock and stuffed the ring far down into the sock. Presently, all 3 of them were snoring. He was awakened by a frightening bleat in his ear. The next few moments were quite confused. He sat up, whispered, "Pipe down," and started to smack his bedmate when he felt his wrist grasped by a hand, not the thumbless little paw of a move-over, a human hand. He kicked out and connected with something. There was a grunt, more anguished bleating, and the click-click-click of little hooves on bare floor. He kicked again and almost broke his toe. The hand let go. He backed away while getting to his feet. There were sounds of struggle near him and loud bleating. The sounds died down while he was still trying to peer through the darkness to find out what was happening. Then a light came on blindingly, and he saw Charlie standing in the door, dressed in a wraparound and a big shiny cleaver. "What's the matter with you?" Charlie demanded. Don did his best to explain, but move-overs, dreams, and clutching hands in the dark were badly mixed together. "You eat too much late at night," Charlie decided. Nevertheless, he checked the place, with Don trailing after. When he came to a window with a broken hasp, he did not say anything, but went at once to the cash register and the lockbox. Neither seemed to have been disturbed. Charlie nailed up the broken catch, shoved the move-overs back into the night, and said, "Go to sleep," to Don. He returned to his own room. Don tried to do so, but it was some time before he could quiet down. Both his money and the ring were still at hand. He put the ring back on his finger and went to sleep with his fist clenched. Next morning, Don had plenty of time to think as he coped with an unending stack of dirty dishes. The ring was on his mind. He was not wearing it. Not only did he wish to avoid plunging it repeatedly into hot water, but he also now was reluctant to display it. Could it be possible that the thief was after the ring rather than his money? It seemed impossible. A half-credit piece of souvenir counter junk. Or perhaps 5 credits, he corrected himself, here on Venus, where every important item was expensive. 10 at the outside. But he was beginning to wonder. Too many people had taken an interest in it. He reviewed in his mind how he had come by it. On the face of it, Dr. Jefferson had risked death, had died, to make sure that the ring went to Mars. But that was preposterous, and because it was, he had concluded by what seemed to be strict logic that it must have been the paper in which the ring was wrapped that must reach his parents on Mars. That conclusion had been confirmed when the IBI had searched him and confiscated the wrapping paper. Suppose he did assume the wild possibility that it was the ring itself that was important. Even so, how could anyone here on Venus be looking for that ring? He had just landed. He had not even known he was coming to Venus. He might have thought of several ways that news could have gone on before him, but he did not. Moreover, he found it difficult to imagine why anyone would take any special plans on his account. But he had one quality in a high degree. He was stubborn. He swore a mighty oath into the dishwater that he and the ring together would travel to Mars and that he would deliver it to his father as Dr. Jefferson had asked him to do. Business slacked off a little in the middle of the afternoon. Don got caught up. He dried his hands and said to Charlie, "I want to go uptown for a while." "What's the matter? You lazy?" "We work tonight, don't we?" "Sure we do. You think this is a tea room?" "Okay. I work mornings and evenings, so I take a little time off in the afternoon. You've got enough clean dishes to last you for hours." Charlie shrugged and turned his back. Don left. He picked his way through the mud and the crowd back up the street to the IT&T building. The outer room held several customers, but most of them were using the automatic phones or waiting outside the booths for a chance to do so. Isabel Costello was back of the desk and did not seem too busy, though she was chatting with a soldier. Don went to the far end of the desk and waited for her to be free. Presently she brushed off the enterprising soldier and came to him. "Well, if it isn't my problem child. How are you making out, son? Got your money changed?" "No, the bank wouldn't take it. I guess you'd better give me my Graham back." "No hurry. Mars is still in conjunction. Maybe you'll strike it rich." Don laughed ruefully. "Not likely." He told her what he was doing and where. She nodded. "You could do worse. Old Charlie's all right, but that's a rough part of town. Be careful, especially after dark." "I will be. Isabel, would you do me a favor?" "If it's not impossible, illegal, or scandalous, yes." Don fished the ring out of his pocket. "Would you take care of this for me? Keep it safe until I want it back?" She took it, held it up to look at it. "Careful," Don urged. "Keep it out of sight." "Huh?" "I don't want anyone to know you have it. Get it out of sight." "Well," she turned away. When she turned back, the ring was gone. "What's the mystery, Don?" "I wish I knew." "Huh?" "I can't tell you any more than that. I just want to keep that ring safe. Somebody is trying to get it away from me." "But, look, does it belong to you?" "Yes, that's all I can tell you." She searched his face. "All right, Don, I'll take care of it." "Thanks." "No trouble, I hope." "Look, stop in again soon. I want you to meet the manager." "Okay, I will." She turned away to take care of a customer. Don waited around until a phone booth was free, then reported his address to the security office at the spaceport. That done, he returned to his dishes. Around midnight, hundreds of dishes later, Charlie turned away the last customer and locked the front door. Together they ate a meal there Together they ate a meal there had been no time for earlier, one with chopsticks, one with fork. Don found himself almost too tired to eat. "Charlie," he said, "how did you run this place with no help?" "Had two helpers. Both joined up. Boys don't want to work these days. All they think about is playing soldier." "So I'm filling two jobs? Better hire another boy, or I might join up too." "Work is good for you." "Maybe. You certainly take your own advice. I've never seen anybody work as hard as you do." Charlie leaned back and rolled a cigarette of the shaggy native crazy weed. "While I work, I think about how someday I go home. A little garden with a wall around it, a little bird to sing to me." He waved his hand through choking smoke at the dreary walls of the restaurant. "While I cook, I don't see this. I see my little garden." "Oh." "I save money to go home." He puffed furiously. "I go home, or my bones will." Don understood him. He had heard of bone money in his childhood. All the immigrant Chinese planned to go home. Too often it was only a package of bones that made the trip. The younger Venus-born Chinese laughed at the idea. To them, Venus was home, and China only a much gummed tale. He decided to tell Charlie his own trouble, and did so, omitting any mention of the ring and all connected with it. "So you see, I'm just as anxious to get to Mars as you are to go home to China." "Mars is a long way off." "Yes, but I've got to get there." Charlie finished his cigarette and stood up. "You stick with Charlie. Work hard and I cut you in on the profits. Someday this war nonsense will be over. Then we both go." He turned to go. "Good night." "Good night." This time Don checked personally to see that no move-overs had managed to sneak in, then retired to his cubbyhole. He was asleep almost at once, to dream of climbing endless mountain ranges of dishes, with Mars somewhere beyond. Don was lucky to have a cubbyhole in a cheap restaurant as a place to sleep. The city was bursting at its seams. Even before the political crisis, which had turned into the capital of a new nation, Don was lucky to have a cubbyhole in a cheap restaurant as a place to sleep. The city was bursting at its seams. Even before the political crisis which had turned it into the capital of a new nation, New London had been a busy place, marketplace for 1,000,000 square miles of backcountry and principal spaceport of the planet. The de facto embargo on interplanetary shipping resulting from the outbreak of war with the mother planet might eventually starve the fat off the city, but as yet the only effect had been to spill into the town grounded spacemen who prowled the streets and sampled what diversions the town offered. The spacemen were hardly noticed. Much more numerous were the politicians. On Governor's Island, separated from Main Island by a stagnant creek, the Estates General of the new republic was in session. Nearby, in what had been the gubernatorial mansion, the executive general, his chief of state, and the departmental ministers bickered with each other over office space and clerical help. Already a budding bureaucracy was spilling over onto Main Island, South Island, East Spit, and Tombstone Island, vying with each other for buildings and sending rents sky high. In the wake of the statesmen and elected officials, and much more numerous, were the small fry and hangers-on of government, clerks who worked and special assistants who did not, worked world savers, men with messages, lobbyists for and lobbyists against, men who claimed to speak for the native dragons but had never gotten around to learning the Quizzle speech, and dragons who were quite capable of speaking on their own behalf and did. Nevertheless, Governor's Island did not sink under the load. North of the city, on Buchanan Island, another city was burgeoning, training camps for the middle guard and the ground forces. It was protested bitterly in the estates that the presence of training grounds at the national capital was an invitation to national suicide, as one H-bomb could wipe out both the government and most of the armed forces of Venus. Nevertheless, nothing had been done about it. It was argued that the men had to have some place for recreation. If the training grounds were moved out into the trackless bush, the men would desert and go back to their farms and mines. Many had deserted. In the meantime, New London swarmed with soldiery. The Two Worlds dining room was jammed from morning till night. Old Charlie left the range only to tend cash register. Don's hands were raw from hot water and detergent. Between times, he stoked the water boiler back of the shack using oily chiga logs hauled in by a dragon known as Daisy, but male despite the chosen name. Electric water heating would have been cheaper. Electric power was an almost costless byproduct of the atomic pile west of the city, but the equipment to use electric power was very expensive and almost unobtainable. New London was full of such frontier contrasts. Its muddy, unpaved streets were lighted here and there by atomic power. Rocket-powered sky shuttles connected it with other human settlements, but inside its own boundaries, transportation was limited to Shank's Pony and the gondolas that served in lieu of taxis and tubes. Some of these were powered, more moved by human muscle. New London was ugly, uncomfortable, and unfinished, but it was stimulating. Don liked the gutsy, brawling drive of the place, liked it much better than the hothouse lushness of New Chicago. It was as alive as a basket full of puppies, as vital as a punch in the jaw. There was a feeling in the air of new things about to happen, new hopes, new problems. After a week in the restaurant, Don felt almost as if he had been there all his life. Furthermore, he was not unhappy at it. Oh, to be sure, the work was hard, and he was still determined to get to Mars, eventually. But in the meantime, he slept well, ate well, and had his hands busy. And there were always the customers to talk and argue with. Spacemen, guardsmen, small-time politicians who could not afford the better restaurants. The place was a political debating club, city news desk, and rumor mill. The gossip swapped over Charlie's food was often tomorrow's headlines in the New London Times. Don kept up the precedent of a mid-afternoon break even when he had no business to transact. If Isabel was not too busy, he would take her across the street for a Coke. She was as yet his only friend outside the restaurant. On one such occasion, she said, "No, come on inside. I want you to meet the manager." "Eh? About your gram?" "Oh, yeah, I'd been meaning to. Isabel, there's no point to it yet. I haven't got the money. I'm going to wait another week and hit old Charlie for a loan. He can't replace me very easily. I think he'll come across to keep me in durance vile." "That's no good. You ought to get a better job as soon as you can. Come on." She opened the gate in the counter desk and led him into an office in the rear, where she introduced him to a worried-looking, middle-aged man. "This is Don Harvey, the young man I was telling you about." The older man shook his head. "Oh, yes, something about a message to Mars, I think my daughter said." Don turned to Isabel. "Daughter? You didn't tell me the manager was your father." "You didn't ask." "But never mind. Glad to know you, sir. And you. Now about that message. I don't know why Isabel brought me in here. I can't pay for it. All I have is Federation money." Mr. Costello examined his nails and looked troubled. "Mr. Harvey, under the rules, I'm supposed to require cash payment for interplanetary traffic. I'd like to accept your Federation notes, but I can't. It's against the law." He stared at the ceiling. "Of course, there is a black market in Federation money." Don grinned ruefully. "So I found out, but 15 or even 20% is too low a rate. I still couldn't pay for my gram." 20%? The going rate is 60%. "Is it? I guess I must have looked like a sucker. Never mind. I was not going to suggest that you go to the black market. In the first place, Mr. Harvey, I am in the odd position of representing a Federation corporation which has not been expropriated, but I am loyal to the Republic. If you walk out of here and return shortly with money of the Republic instead of Federation notes, I would simply call the police." "Oh, Daddy, you wouldn't." "Quiet, Isabel. In the second place, it's not good for a young man to have such dealings." He paused. "But perhaps we can work something out. Your father would pay for this message, would he not?" "Oh, certainly. But I can't send it collect." "Very well. Write a draft on your father for the amount. I'll accept it as payment." Instead of answering at once, Don thought about it. It seemed the same as sending a message collect, which he was willing to do, but running up debts in his father's name without his knowledge stuck in his craw. "See here, Mr. Costello, you couldn't cash such a draft any time soon in any case. Why don't I just give you an IOU and pay it back as quickly as possible? Isn't that better?" "Yes and no. Your personal note is simply a case of letting you have interplanetary service on credit, which is what the rules forbid. On the other hand, a draft on your father is commercial paper, equivalent to cash even if I don't cash it right away. A space lawyer's difference, granted, but it's the difference between what I can do and can't do with the corporation's affairs." "Thanks," said Don slowly, "but I think I'll wait a while. I may be able to borrow the money elsewhere." Mr. Costello looked from Don to Isabel, shrugged helplessly. "Oh, give me your IOU," he said snappishly. "Make it out to me, not to the company. You can pay me when you can." He looked again at his daughter, who was smiling approval. Good old Dad. And we'll see how Don fares furthermore in New London, Venus, the new Republic of Venus, next time.